Imagine this, not a battlefield, not a war room, a conference table inside the White House. Around it sit oil executives, Chevron, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and across from them, the President of the United States. He doesn't talk about democracy. He doesn't talk about human rights. He makes a different promise. Total safety, total security, not to Venezuela, but to oil companies. Invest $100 billion, and the United States will protect you. Nicolas Maduro is gone. Venezuela's oil is open again. The largest reserves on earth. And suddenly, power sounds simple. Oil out, money in, protection guaranteed. I'm Fareed Zakaria, and I want you to pause right here. Because when a superpower speaks this openly, when oil replaces diplomacy, and corporations sit where nations once did, the real story is never the promise. It's the system behind it. And that is where this story truly begins. Let's slow the moment down. Because what happened here is bigger than one meeting, bigger than one country. This is not just about Venezuela reopening its oil fields. It's about how power is being reorganized. The president frames it as opportunity, a nation reborn, an industry unleashed, lower energy prices for Americans. But look closer. The investment is not public money. It's private capital, corporate risk, corporate reward. What the government offers is something else. Protection, security, political cover. In other words, the state clears the path. Corporations do the extracting. And oil becomes the bridge between force and profit. At the same time, the executives hesitate. They speak carefully. They mention laws, contracts, debts, past losses. One side speaks in certainty. The other speaks in conditions. And between them sits Venezuela, a country rich in resources, poor in stability, absent from the room. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we have to go back through history, back through oil, back through power. Because this story did not begin last week. To understand this moment, you have to understand Venezuela's past. For decades, oil was its engine. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, production surged. Money flowed. The state grew confident. Then the rules changed. The government reasserted control. Assets were nationalized. Foreign companies were pushed out. ExxonMobil left. ConocoPhillips left. Billions of dollars were frozen in dispute. What followed was slow decay. Investment dried up. Infrastructure aged. Production fell sharply. Oil was still there. The systems to extract it were not. By the time Nicolas Maduro took power, the industry was already fragile. Over time, it collapsed further. Today, Venezuela holds the world's largest crude reserves. But reserves alone do not produce oil. You need capital, technology, legal certainty, and trust. That trust was broken years ago, and rebuilding it is far harder than seizing power, which is why what comes next matters. Because history has a way of returning, right, when leaders think it no longer applies. Then came the first rupture. The moment everything was supposed to change, Nicolas Maduro was captured, removed from power, taken into U.S. federal court on narco-terrorism charges. And almost instantly, the language shifted from sanctions to opportunity, from isolation to extraction. At the White House, the president spoke with certainty. Production could surge 18 months, maybe less. Oil executives listened. Some nodded, some hesitated, because this was not just a political reset. It was a financial reckoning. ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips had left nearly 20 years earlier. Their assets had been nationalized. Billions were still owed. Now they were being told to start fresh. An even plate, the president called it. No looking back. No settling old losses. Make money now. Forget the past. This was the crisis beneath the celebration. Because trust does not reset with regime change. Contracts do not erase themselves. History does not disappear on command. And investors know this. If you want to understand why optimism and caution collided in that room, stay with me. Because the real risk wasn't political, it was structural. Because beneath the headlines, there is a system at work. And it is older than Donald Trump, older than Venezuela's crisis. Older than this moment, oil does not move on promises. It moves on rules, legal frameworks, property rights, courts that can be trusted, contracts that survive elections. This is the mechanism oil executives care about. That's why one word cut through the room: uninvestable. Not because the oil isn't there, not because the technology doesn't exist, but because the system is broken. Executives spoke of significant changes to laws, to commercial structures, to enforcement. Without that, protection means little. Soldiers can guard pipelines. They cannot enforce contracts. Governments can promise safety. They cannot manufacture trust overnight. And here lies the hidden mechanism. Power can remove a leader. It can seize assets. It can control revenue, but it cannot instantly rebuild institutions. This is where many interventions fail. They confuse control with stability, force with legitimacy, speed with sustainability. And when those lines blur, the consequences don't arrive immediately. They arrive later, quietly, systemically, which brings us to the second moment of tension, the one that reveals who truly benefits and who does not. Then came the second shock, quieter, but more revealing. An executive order, signed quietly, framed as emergency protection. Its purpose was simple: block courts, block creditors, prevent Venezuelan oil revenue held in U.S. accounts from being seized. The money would not go to lenders, not to past claimants, not to those owed billions. It would be used in Venezuela for peace, for prosperity, for stability. On paper, it sounded humanitarian. In reality, it sent a signal. Old debts could wait. Legal claims could pause. The future mattered more than the past. But markets remember, ExxonMobil is still owed billions. ConocoPhillips alone holds $12 billion in Venezuelan debt. These are not footnotes. They are balance sheets. And when governments begin choosing which rules apply, and when investors recalibrate, not emotionally, mathematically, this was the real crisis. Because once revenue flows are politically managed, once courts are sidelined, once emergency becomes the new normal, capital grows cautious. And cautious capital does not rebuild nations. It hesitates, it waits, or it leaves. And while executives debate risk in boardrooms, another group feels the impact immediately. The people, which brings us to the most important question of all. What does this mean for you? If you live inside the system being rebuilt? Now let's shift the lens away from boardrooms, away from executive orders. To you, if you are Venezuelan, none of these promises sound abstract. You have heard them before. Oil booms, grand plan, foreign money arriving soon. And yet, over time, infrastructure aged, production collapsed, jobs disappeared. This new moment is being sold as renewal, as rebuilding, as stability. But notice something important. You are not in the room. Your voice is not at the table. Your future is being negotiated through oil flows and legal shields. Executives talk about risk. Governments talk about control. You live with the outcome. If investment comes, it may come fast. If it leaves faster. And when systems are rebuilt around extraction, they do not automatically rebuild society. Schools do not rise from oil wells. Trust does not flow from pipelines. This is where history becomes personal. If you care about who benefits when power and profit align, stay with me. Share this conversation. Because understanding the system is the first step to changing it. And the effects do not stop at Venezuela's borders. What happens in Venezuela does not stay in Venezuela. Oil never allows that. When one of the world's largest reserves reopens, markets listen. Governments adjust. Rivals recalibrate. The White House made this clear. Lower production costs, lower oil prices, $50 a barrel. For American consumers, that sounds like relief. For oil-producing states, it sounds like pressure because more supply reshapes leverage. It affects OPEC, it affects Russia, it affects countries whose budgets depend on high prices. Control Venezuelan oil, and you don't just move barrels. You move power. This is why foreign intervention around energy is never local. It sends signals far beyond borders. Who controls extraction? Who controls revenue? Who decides how long that control lasts? The White House said it planned to control Venezuela's oil indefinitely. That single word matters. Indefinitely does not describe a transition. It describes a new equilibrium. History shows these arrangements are unstable. They create dependence, they provoke resistance, they invite countermoves, and when energy becomes a geopolitical lever, the system tightens, which leads to the final question. If this is the present, what comes next? Because the future is not one path. It is three. From here, the future splits, not into one outcome, but three. The first is the optimistic path. Investment arrives, legal changes follow. Production rises faster than expected. Oil flows, revenue stabilizes, confidence slowly returns. In this version, Venezuela rebuilds unevenly, imperfectly, but forward. The second path is more likely. Money comes in cautiously. Projects move slowly. Legal reforms lag behind promises. Production increases, but not enough. Disputes resurface. Trust remains fragile. The system functions, but it never fully heals. Then there is the third path, the dangerous one. Rules remain unclear. Revenue stays politicized. Old debts turn into new conflicts. Investors pull back. Intervention hardens into control. Resistance grows. Oil flows become a source of tension, not recovery. History tells us something important here. Resource wealth does not determine outcomes. Institutions do. When systems are built for extraction before legitimacy, the future narrows. And the cost is not paid immediately. It is paid over time, quietly, by societies trapped inside unfinished transitions. Which brings us to the final insight. Because this story is not just about Venezuela. It is about how modern power thinks. Here is the truth we often avoid. Oil does not save countries. Power does not rebuild systems. And promises do not create trust. What happened in that White House room was not a rescue plan. It was a mirror, a reflection of how the modern world works. When institutions collapse, power steps in. When risk is high, corporations demand protection. And when oil is involved, moral language follows strategic interest. Venezuela is rich in resources, but poor in institutional certainty. And that gap is where history repeats itself. The question is not whether oil will flow. It will. The question is who controls it, who benefits, and who lives with the consequences. If you want to understand the world as it is, not as it's sold, keep watching, keep questioning, and share this with someone who still believes power is simple. Because the next story will go deeper. And the system that shapes Venezuela is shaping more countries than we admit.